In this episode of Automation Tech Tips, I sit down with Luis Navarez from Siemens to learn how to add animated objects to a dashboard inside of the S7-1500 using the new View of Things feature. Luis, thank you for coming on Automation Tech Tips. I'm really excited to see how we go about implementing this new View of Things feature inside of the S7-1500. Now, I know you showed it to us back on the podcast when we covered all the V17 features, but today I'm hoping you can show us how to do it. Just do that one thing.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn, for having us on this Tech Tips. I'm really excited to show you guys this new feature that I think is really cool and also very useful for easily being able to create some custom dashboards. Some nice displays for without even the need for an HMI device. Now, one thing I do want to point out is this view of things is it is a very good way to visualize some information on the PLC, but it's not a substitution for an HMI device, right? HMIs are so much more powerful than a web, than a web server on a PLC, but it is still very nice to have as kind of a backup for an HMI, or just if you just want to have a simple display just to visualize what's happening on the machine, or even simple operation of certain parameters. Very clean and easy way to do it without having to have any kind of web development know-how.
Well, and that's a good point because the product already had, before this new release, the product already had a custom user web page. Is that correct? You could create your own web pages if you knew how to do HTML and JavaScript and that.
That is correct. So I'll show you a little bit about that. But yeah, our PLCs already had an integrated web server that showed some Siemens developed screens already that showed some really useful and valuable information on diagnostics, being able to edit tags and things, and we can go through that if you'd like. But now with this new view of things, we can also, before we could create user-defined web pages, but it really required a lot of HTML web development know-how. With view of things, it makes it a lot easier, almost like you're developing an HMI screen, but just for your PLC web page. So,
yeah, I think just from using different controllers over the years, I think this feature is going to bring more people in because I think trying to learn how to be a HTML developer is typically out of the basket of most electrical engineers or controls engineers. Whereas what you showed us during the podcast, and I'm hoping we can do again today in this tech tip, is really pretty user friendly.
Yeah, and so it is. And so if you want, I can dive right in and we can go ahead and get started.
Please, thank you.
All right. So the first thing to take advantage of this new view of things editor is you need TI Portal version 17. So that's the latest release. It released in May of 2021, so just a couple months ago. So I'm going to open my TI Portal version 17. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, what happens if I have a project that's running with an older version of version 17? That's what we're going to do today. Is I'm going to use a project that was developed with an older version of TI Portal, and I'm going to migrate this to version 17. Now you'll see the migration process is pretty easy, pretty quick. When you open a project, it tells you what version it was used and what components are available for upgrade. Now this project we're going to be doing today is very simplistic, but let's say you got HMIs and drives and certain function blocks that obviously has a lot more checkboxes to validate. Those will be displayed as well, but generally speaking, the process is exactly the same like what we're going through right now.
Now, is this overwriting the original files?
No. So what it does, it actually appends at the end of the file name underscore V17. So you still keep your original project, and then this one just creates a new folder, and you can see it on the top, even like the file directory, it saves it under a new path. This project originally was just called Conveyor. Now it's called Conveyor underscore V17. So you can easily go back to the original if you needed to.
That's awesome. And that's like almost, you have to have that just for safety's sake. But If I understand it correctly, even though you've opened this in V17 now, and it's a V17 file, you could still download it to the old S7-1500 with the old firmware?
Exactly. Yeah. So the way our hardware works, there's no firmware required per the version of software you're using. So for any users who upgrade their TI Portal license to version 17 and they want to upgrade all their machinery or equipment to version 17, they can easily do that using the process that I just showed you, and download to that version 17 project, and nothing changes, right? The program blocks, everything is exactly the same as it was before, even the older firmware. So the firmware does not change in the project, and you're not forced to change firmware. The one thing that if you do want to take advantage of the new features that are included with version 17, firmware is the latest firmware is required. But if you don't want to take advantage of those new features and you just want to make sure your project is up to date with the latest version of Portal, you can just migrate the project, download, and it'll run as it was before.
Excellent.
Yep. So that being said, I mean, I mentioned, to take advantage of these new features, you need the latest firmware version, right? And so this project was created in version 16 and originally in version 16. And so it's got a CPU with the previous version of firmware in the processor. And I can see this by if I right click on the CPU and just go to properties, it'll open up this little pop-up window here, and I can kind of see the catalog information. I can see the part number and the firmware version number. But I don't have this view of things web application editor, right? In order to get some of those features, we have to migrate the firmware to do so, right? And not just in the hardware itself, like in the PLC updating the firmware, but in the project, we need to inform the software that we are using the latest firmware. So there's two ways really to do this, right? The traditional way with TI Portal has always been to you could right click on the device, go to change device, and you're prompted with this dialog, right? And it allows you to kind of pick your CPU from the drop down menu. You'll see the current, what's configured. And then if I select, something from the hardware catalog, it'll say, okay, this is what you're going to be going to. I can also switch backwards, right? If I maybe wanted to go to an older version of firmware, I don't know why you would want to do that, but
Cool.
but it's there. And I'm going to select version 2.9. Now the nice thing is that it shows like the description in case there's anything new with the CPU description that changes. Sometimes memory increases. Sometimes when we added OPC UA, that was added to the description so you can see it. But it also shows what's new with these with the new firmware when you are migrating or when you're changing over, right? So that's kind of nice. And then once you hit OK, it just changes the hardware and adds some of these features into the project tree. But the other way that was changed recently also that makes it a lot easier to change that information is if I do go to those properties of the CPU. Again, I can get there from the device view or the device configuration of my PLC, or I can right click in the project tree and go to properties. I can see, and if I open up the general tab and I go down to catalog information, there's this button here that says change firmware version. So it makes it a lot easier. Now, if you notice on the previous screen, I had to navigate to the PLC, find the right part number. This makes it a lot easier that I don't even have to navigate. I can just hit that change firmware version, and it automatically filters that catalog to compatible hardware.
That's
And
excellent.
and
That's
and
so
I
much
can
quicker.
automatically select. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and change the firmware so we can see some of those new features implemented. So another thing that changed with version 17 is we implemented the security by default concept. So automatically, when configuring a PLC with the latest firmware, so for the 1500 it's 2.9, for the S7-1200 family it's 4.5, you're automatically prompted to configure these security settings. Now, just to save some time, I'm going to uncheck all these and kind of disable some of these settings and keep them kind of what we call legacy mode.
Sure.
Just to, like I said, kind of save some time. So by default, it's set to like no access, meaning you forces you to kind of enter a password to be able to read and write. But again, I'm going to change this to full access, no protection, just to save some time on this demonstration. We can definitely do some other videos if you'd like on these security features, implementing them, and what that means.
Yeah, that might be a good idea because that's all new in V17. The security by default model, which is the right model, right? But for demonstrations and just learning purposes, I don't think we need to go through all that.
Yeah. So now my catalog shows that I'm using firmware version 2.9. I can compile this just to make sure everything is consistent, make sure everything is working and everything right now. The original project of this did not have a web server enabled. So the first step, aside from the version 17 and making sure you have the latest firmware version configured, we need to make sure we actually have the integrated web server enabled. By default, this is disabled, right? It's a security by default thing again. And I think we started doing that maybe as of like version 15, if I'm not mistaken, or 14. So in the properties of the CPU, again, you select the CPU from the device view, select properties on the bottom, and go to the General tab. Underneath Web Server, there's this checkbox that says Activate Web Server on this module. Select the checkbox. It just says, hey, it's going to reduce the protection on your PLC. Now, this permit access only with HTTPS ensures that we have kind of a secure connection. We can export the certificate of this device into our PLC, into our laptops, or so that way we don't get prompted with that, hey, warning, this is an insecure connection or whatever. And then by default, this update interval is 10 seconds. We can update that to as low as 1 second. But for this view of things, we're not going to worry about that because this is separate from view of things. This doesn't apply. The other setting we need to do is define a user. Now, the unique user, we can define what access level rights they have on the web page, as well as for the VOT, the view of things application. So I'm going to type in a user. I'm just going to call them VOT user. You can see access level is defaulted to minimum. So if I expand this, that means they don't have access to any of these information on the integrated web server. So I do have to define that, right? So I'm going to go and I'm going to select open user defined web pages. I'm also going to select read tags. And if I'm going to have anything on that view of things application where I need to write any values in, I need to make sure I have that write tags checkbox enabled as well.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. I could also have these other checkboxes enabled, but it really depends on what your what you want your user to have access to. So there's other things in the web page, like I mentioned, diagnostics, being able to edit tags, read and write files on the memory card. So, but again, we're focused on view of things today, so I'll just keep those disabled. I need to define a unique password for each user. Now, the everybody user that's automatically created does not require a password, right? So it's everybody, right? Anybody who doesn't enter a password has access to whatever you configure. In this case, I don't want anybody without a password to not have access to anything, or to have access to anything. So I just keep it at minimum.
Okay.
All right. So I've got a user. So I've got my web page enabled. I've got my user defined. Now I think we're ready to enable to design our view of things web application. Let's see. Why isn't it showing up now? We get this folder under OPC UA communications in our project tree called web applications. Now that is where we're going to configure our custom web page, our view of things application. So if we expand that folder, we're going to double click on add new VOT application. Now, we can have up to 4 what's called view of things applications on the PLC. It'll tell you this when you go to download. I'm going to call this, I don't know, all right. So I've named my application dashboard, and with this application, actually, I can have multiple screens defined. For this, I'm just going to, have one screen just for demonstration purposes. And if you've ever used TI Portal, this tree looks very familiar to like what you would do for like an actual HMI device. So it's no different. Even the editing space is very familiar to what our HMI devices, in particular our unified comfort panels, look like. Now I will note that since the PLC is a PLC, right? It's not designed specifically for display. You are limited in what kind of elements and objects you can show on this view of things application as compared to a standard HMI device that's designed to do display. So for example, right, I don't have any trend view boxes or anything on here, right? But I have things like gauges, buttons, IO fields. I can do, a bar. So I'm gonna just to illustrate, I'm gonna just drop in a gauge. The nice thing is this is all SVG, right? Scalable vector graphics. So even if I have different, it's resolution independent. So depending on what browser I'm using or what the resolution on my screen is, the objects will adapt to the browser settings. So even if I'm on a smartphone, for example, I'm going to add an IO field, and let's put a text box above that, and let's change this text to output. So it's kind of redundant, but I guess it doesn't really matter. All right, so how do I add a tag to these objects? So there's several ways. I have a HMI tag table, and I can browse to my PLC tags from here. But I'm going to go to my screen, and in my program blocks folder in my PLC, now I've already got a program set up here. All it is just a sine wave function generator. It's nothing fancy. And with that sine wave function block, there's always an instance data block, and with the data block, I can use those tags there. So I'm just going to take my value tag from my data block and just drop it on the object.
Nice.
So I've dropped it onto this. So I've dropped it on this gauge. I'm going to drop it on this IO field. Actually, maybe I should just rename that to value. And we should be good to go. So right now, we're ready to download this, right? So I'm just gonna right now I'm using a PLC Sim Advanced, so I don't have any physical hardware connected to this, but the process of downloading and compiling and everything is exactly the same as you would have a physical PLC. So the nice thing is you can actually test this out before deploying it on a physical, on your machine, on your real system, to make sure that everything runs very smoothly.
Now, let me ask you a question. So PLC Sim comes with TIA Portal included. PLC Sim Advanced is an additional charge. Do we need to use Advanced to simulate the VOT screen?
Yes, you do. So yeah, exactly. So the Advanced allows a lot more functionality, like being able to simulate a lot of the communication functions of the PLC, and that also includes the web communications. So the web server, and everything is part of that.
Okay.
Whereas PLC Sim is pretty limited on what it can simulate from a communications standpoint. All right, so I saved my project. Now, because this is a separate application, we do need to compile it separately from our PLC, just like we would a physical HMI. So I'm going to select my dashboard or my view of things application. I'm going to hit this compile button on the top. You could also right click and go to compile as well. and then I'm going to download to my PLC. The reason why I didn't hit compile for the PLC is because it compiles anyways automatically when I go to download. So, no sense in kind of doing the same thing. Now I'm presented with this download to device. Because I'm using PLC Sim Advanced, I've actually enabled the virtual Ethernet adapter for the PLC Sim Advanced instance. So this is basically like selecting a physical Ethernet interface card and connecting to a real PLC, except this is kind of a virtual NIC connecting to a emulated PLC.
Now, did you need to do that so we could open a browser and connect to PLC Advanced? Like, did you need to enable that virtual Ethernet adapter for a PLC Sim Advanced so that we could connect to it?
Yeah, so in PLC Sim Advanced, and I'll show you that in a second. Once I finish downloading, so I can see my PLC here on the list of compatible devices. I hit this load button. Now, the first time you download to a PLC with version 17, there's no certificates, there's no encryption between, so it's just warning you that, hey, you could be connecting to, a device that you haven't connected to. We don't have the certificate in Portal. Do you consider this trusted? And so if it's the first time and if you think it is the correct PLC, then obviously, you consider it trusted. If not, then you might want to abort and do some troubleshooting. All right, so there's already a program on this instance, but I'm just going to overwrite this. And so there's a couple things to keep note. So when you download to the PLC, your view of things applications, you have your normal dialogues and warnings when you download to PLC, but all the way at the bottom, there's this web applications dialog. And it's telling you, hey, there must be only 4 web apps to the device. There's already 4. One of them needs to be deleted or anything more than that. The existing ones need to be deleted, and then the new ones need to be downloaded. There's a list of all the applications that you have, and you can select which ones you want to actually load to the device. And it also asks if you want to delete any of the existing ones. There's already one in there, so I'm just going to delete that one. So this dashboard application that I created is going to overwrite what is on the PLC already.
So the PLC program is stored in a different location than these VOT projects. And so that's why it's giving you this. Because I would, in a typical PLC, you download, you wipe everything out when you download. But here we could actually, the dashboard could survive even if you downloaded the PLC program. That's what it looks like.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 2 separate downloads. So you got to make sure you select this checkbox, or else you're just downloading the PLC program and not the web application. But so I'm going to hit load.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So I was just going to say, so I'm going to hit load. I'm going to put my PLC into run because there was some hardware configuration changes, enabling the web server and defining users. Then that's hardware config, and that stops the PLC, but had nothing to do with the view of things. So, all right, so I've got my application loaded. I think you had a question before I continue.
No, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the PLC Sim, you asked about the virtual Ethernet adapter. When you start PLC Sim Advanced, there's 2 ways you can configure access to the PLC Sim Advanced instance. You can do it using the regular PLC Sim driver, which you saw kind of showed up as a default when I went to download. Mm-hmm. Or you can kind of switch it over to this virtual Ethernet adapter, which is used if you wanted to simulate some of that communication functions, the OPC UA server and the web server and things like that. And then, you configure the IP addresses and stuff. You can have multiple instances running. So if you got a project with multiple PLCs, that's possible. All right. So now I'm going to open my web browser, and I'm going to browse to the web page. Now, remember, I had that checkbox saying access only through HTTPS. I had that enabled, right? So I'm going to type in HTTPS : / / and then the IP address of my um, PLC. Now, again, because I didn't export that certificate from the PLC into my laptop, I get this warning that, hey, your connection is not private. Could, um, it's not a secure connection. I'm going to just continue as it is, but obviously we encourage users to use the best method, best secure methods. So definitely export those certificates. And I'm going to log in as the user I created, VOT user. All right, now I've logged in. Now you can see I have access to a couple more pages. I've got this user-defined web page, and here it says homepage of the application dashboard. So I click on there. Now we sign in again as the VOT user, and the reason why this is because you could actually have, maybe you just have like maintenance user for the main web page, for the main user defined web page, but maybe you want a specific user to have access only to this VOT, right? If I wanted to just bookmark this and have it quick access to the VOT dash application and not have to navigate through the web page, this is very useful in that respect. So in maybe I guess yep. And that's it. So we've got our application running. It's running super fast. Oh, so I talked about the update rate for the web page, right? The default was 10 seconds. With this web application, you can actually have a different update rate for each screen or each object. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so here's the application cycle in milliseconds. So you just go to, if you want to change how the view of things application actually updates a different rate than the general web server of the PLC. The fastest you can update this is 200 milliseconds. If you happen to type in something less, it'll warn you and just says, hey, only 200 or 5,000 is accepted. So the slowest it can update is 5 seconds, and the fastest it can update is 200 milliseconds, which, generally speaking, the default is 500 milliseconds. So generally speaking, this is probably fast enough, for just a dashboard type application anyways.
Well, Lewis, I really appreciate you going through not only how to change on my project from version 16 to 17, but also the how to change the firmware in my project for the controller, and then actually going in and building this from scratch, this view of things screen, and connecting to it and taking a look at it. And quite honestly, I think most users out there are going to find this much easier to do instead of trying to create something from scratch from HTML. So I really appreciate you coming on Tech Tips and showing us how to do this. I can't wait to try it myself.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn, again for allowing us to show this to your viewers. I just want to kind of leave one thing out there. This is a really nice feature, and really the benefits or the use case for this. There's plenty of different use cases you could have for this, but when we think of like IoT applications, a lot of times it's just access to data, easy access to data. Sometimes people just want easier access to the data without having to have technical know-how of PLC engineering software, right? If you're a operations manager or something, maybe you just want to see some OEE information, but you don't want to invest in a very expensive IoT infrastructure or have some custom screens develop on the SCADA system. When all you need is a specific number just to get an idea. This is a really good feature for that. This is a really good tool to take advantage of for use cases like that.
Yeah, I can definitely see wanting every S7-1500 you have in your plant to have a very simple dashboard with either KPIs or whatever value is most important for the operation manager to know. This is something that any PLC programmer could do. You won't have to be like a SCADA or MES expert to put this together quickly and just give your operation guy a link to each of the PLCs so he can see it. So excellent. I'm excited to try this on myself. I can't wait to get my hands on it. Thanks again, Lewis, for coming on.
No problem. Thank you, Shawn.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. And I want to thank Lewis for taking all the time out of his week to put that together for us and then come on the show and show us how to do it. I like how he not only showed us how to take the project from 16 to 17 and then go in and change the firmware of the controller, but he also went in and showed us how to add a default user and then add those graphic objects to the display and then download it and get it all running. So kudos to Lewis. Really appreciate you coming on the show and showing us how to do that. Now, if you did enjoy this episode, please give us a like and a sub. And if you want to follow me and keep track of me and get in contact with me, you can do so over at automation.locals.com. With that said, I want to wish you all a very happy, safe, and healthy week. And until next time, my friends, peace.